So I just want to sit back and think about if you've met any of these people in your own life who have had a spiritual experience, a religious experience, but got caught up in the mental health system, got locked up behind locked doors, forced on meds, and stigmatized, had a prejudice against them within their family, friends, work community, but they really were having some kind of a spiritual awakening. So I named Mary, Jen, Maisha, Kalechi, Emily, Peggy, Brett, Marlena, Colleen, Denise, Sean, Gogo, Jim, Sarah, Matt, Mark, Lucy, Carolyn, Laura, Jenny, Stacy, Joshua, Jen, Manpreet, Benjamin, Oryx, Vesper, David. So my name got added to that list in 2005. So I actually want to start off with naming names, and they're just first names. And I had what was really a good spiritual awakening that was seen as a mental illness. I got escorted by the police into a mental institution, fully sane, fully calm. And after the police met me and looked at my research on this topic, they said to me, but we have to take you in anyway. And I almost felt bad for them because I don't think they wanted to. Could you just give a kind of a brief comment of your awareness that this is true in your profession?
Yeah, let me, you have a lot there, and let me kind of try to shrink it down. And I'm looking at it from, I'm also a police officer, I'm a retired chief of police, also a psychologist. I was in private practice, still do a lot of consultant work, but several things, people, I always try to expand the concept of that religious spirituality. Basically, it's a belief system, and all of us have one. And when I train police officers, I always tell them, I make them aware that you always have a belief system, and you try to identify that in people. What do they believe? What don't they believe? How they believe is getting more in depth, but you want to understand what they believe and what they don't believe. And you can encounter that on a lot of calls. Okay. And that's where a lot of police officers do, I'll say, like kind of overreact and just they'll arrest somebody, they'll take them to the hospital. And that comes from not knowing, just like you say, awareness. And over my 50 years in law enforcement, I've seen our profession become more aware, and we're really in the stages now of being aware of a lot of things that we weren't aware of. I tell people, I remember in Florida when wives were chattel, they were property. A man could beat his wife up, my officers respond, and the husband could say, "Get off my property," and we had to leave. Okay. And I see through the awareness, we've changed that, but it's taken us 20, 30 years to do that. The same way I've seen with mental health issues. And we're making them more aware of it. In fact, we have, Florida Department of Law Enforcement, that's what certifies officers. And we have mandatory training that we have to go through every 4 years, 2 years, things like that. And I just went through some, and they have a 4-hour mental health awareness. And I could see that this fits into that. So we're making,
Yes.
officers aware. We're making them aware on the patrol level, but we need to make the administrators aware of it also. Because I've seen officers, they get on a call and their answer to everything is arrest them.
Mm.
And a lot of times officers are left with no option but to arrest them or take a person to the hospital. Because, here in Florida and across the country, we have certain criteria and laws, like we have Marchman, we have a Baker Act, and there's certain criteria. And I find it here in Florida that there's only 3 people that can commit under a civil commitment somebody to a hospital, and that's a psychiatrist, a psychologist, and a police officer. And here in Florida, to be a police officer, you need a 9th grade level of education, versus the 20 some years of education I have in my experience, and my partner who's a psychiatrist, but again, that's when they get on the scene, they're dealing with it the best they can. And sometimes that's the simple way of just taking them to the hospital and letting somebody like me or a psychiatrist then deal with them and evaluate them. I have seen, again, people that have religious experience. I recognized it as such. I discussed with it, but I would still, evaluate them. Do they mean harm to themselves or to others? If not, then, they're free to go. They're released. But I really applaud the efforts of making this awareness push at all levels, not only police, but the EMTs. Think about this, that under their own statistics, that's only about maybe 3 to 5% of the total population that had a bipolar manic episode versus 30 to 50% of people that have positive spiritual, religious experiences.
1979, I'm 25, 2005, I'm 50, do the math. There was no trust in the system, not in anyone around me, not in my college, none. I attempted and I immediately saw no trust, do not speak, keep my mouth shut. I had 100% faith in God. I had private prayers. I remember the prayers at 25 in 2005. It's like, Lord, what am I doing now? And both were go into the hospital in compliance. Do not fight. I did not fight. I was very calm. I was given grace both times. And so faith was in my jurisdiction. And I was guided both times calmly into the ER, through the hospital, and out without incident, without handcuffs, without putting in a seclusion. And that's not true for a lot of our colleagues. So I'm going to just say that too. I looked quickly. There was no trust, but it would be, Dr. Olivia, if you showed up and wanted to talk to me. But I did have my faith that walked me through. Carlito?
Yeah, I could say one phrase we could employ that has worked for me, and it was something that I was trained through actually on an active rescue response with someone who's about to jump on to the train tracks, and it got to a very heated, escalated moment where the person in crisis was, basically saying, don't call the cops or I'm jumping on this, the train tracks, committing suicide. But I worked the person to a calm. But I think this could, and I employ this and I help this with other communities where we're doing first response too, is you could try this question and it does start the atmosphere of trust, is asking the question to the person in crisis. So what does help look like to you today? Tell me, what does help look like to you today? Because I want to help. That's what I'm here to do. And what that does, it empowers the person to really think through and say, well, first, I want you not to call the 911. Absolutely. I will not do that. Right. And then it starts a calm conversation to engage. So I think that's helped a lot when I've gotten into very extreme cases of active rescue. So you could try that phrase. Very much could help.
I love that, Carlito, because it gives them back the value that their opinion matters and that they know that they need assistance, but they need to know what they need in that moment. I love that.
Yep.
And I'm going to build on that, because if we keep focusing it back on the religious, spiritual experiences that might be extreme, we want to advocate, do you want a clergy call? Do you want your spiritual leader called? And that is brand new. It's not happening. It's not a standard right, but that's kind of part of the movement. We want to eventually get into legislation, but right now we want to be able to say, do you want a spiritual leader or religious leader to be called now? And one of our coalition members would say, I do want to show up and I want to walk through the incarceration, the hospital, the psychiatric. I want to walk through this to just give some comfort to the person, even if they do have to be put in the hospital. And again, Olivia, if you want to comment, because you've heard us say this before, that's a simple thing that we're not necessarily saying first responders need to understand the whole religiosity scenario. We do want to prevent the quick diagnosis that it's sick and crazy.
Yeah.
Olivia, you want to comment? Yeah.
Yeah. And, you know, sometimes it may not be appropriate or timely to get somebody on scene when you're having this issue. But again, I put in the comment, maybe this is something that happens, like you said, when we pass them off to whoever they're seeing at the emergency department, that the comment be made that we need to look at this as a spiritual experience possibly, and to make that noted in their file, and then say, can you follow up to see if they have a spiritual advisor, or contact the family to see if they know who that person is and see if they'll come to the ER or the ED to speak with this person. And I think just giving that step alone, it doesn't cost anything to do that. It's a little time consuming. So of course it may hold up law enforcement and they may have to pass that off. But I think just doing that, even if it's not a spiritual experience, how is this going to be a bad thing if you're telling them that you value what they're telling you? Just like Carlito said, what do you need right now to help you? And you offer that suggestion even to them if they don't offer it, and see if that doesn't help to not only de-escalate the situation, but it also puts the power back to them to where they are starting to feel more empowered now about the direction of where things are going.